Hello! So today we're going to talk a little bit about comics, graphic novels, and manga. So why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about this because we are still trying to develop a familiarity with quality literature for children, including knowledge of genre, book awards, and trends. And we're also trying to understand and trace the development of children's literature from the early alphabet books to modern works. So obviously through the semester, we have been progressing through time. We started at the beginning of the semester with our discussion about basic children's books and fables and fairy tales. And the past few weeks we've spent looking at more contemporary works in the contemporary realistic fiction, the multimedia genre, poetry, verse novels. And so this week we are looking at graphic novels are the books that we read. We had 4 options: American-Born Chinese, In Real Life, and Anya's Ghost, and Speak. All 4 of those graphic novels I highly recommend. They're really great. They're all about very different topics, though. American-Born Chinese is about being a first-generation Chinese American, and it's the trials and tribulations of a young boy facing some racism, which I think is particularly relevant right now, given our current pandemic and some of the racial issues that are happening with Asian Americans because of that. In Real Life looks at a young teenage girl, and she gets involved in some video games and develops a relationship, an unexpected relationship with a worker in a different country who is facing some very real poverty issues. And it's a very interesting and complicated look at something that's kind of seemingly simplistic. Anya's Ghost deals with the trials of being a young teenage woman and growing up, and in a really interesting way talks about some issues related to death. And then Speak, we have probably one of the more heavy books that we were assigned this semester, which it deals with the sexual assault of a young woman and the after effects of that. So if you are interested in reading any of those books, I definitely check it out. But I would have a trigger warning for Speak that there is sexual assault in it, and that's something to be aware of. So we know that we have these books that we're reading, but let's talk a little bit about the basis of these 3 different kind of genres. If I can get my computer to cooperate with me. So first of all, I want to know, do you like reading comics, graphic novels, or manga? I feel like these books, these kinds of texts, are often ways for us to get people interested in reading who otherwise say that they don't like reading. If you look at a book and there's some pictures in it and it looks like a comic strip, you may have a better time of getting some of those reluctant readers on board, because the text is more engaging and less kind of intimidating than just looking at a strict wall of text. But that certainly doesn't mean that they're not as complicated or even more complicated. Some of the first memories I have of reading was reading the comic strips in the Sunday paper. So Snoopy, my dad would be sitting there at the coffee table, reading the Sunday paper and eating a bowl of Trix, and I would be sitting there eating a bowl of Trix as well, and looking through the funny strips, the comics, as we enjoyed our breakfast together. So I think maybe some of us can resonate with that idea of watching Saturday morning cartoons, reading the comic strips in the Sunday newspapers. Since then, I've become a really big fan of graphic novels. I really, really enjoy graphic novels, and I hope that you enjoyed the graphic novel that you were assigned for the semester, because they're a really, really great medium, really great genre to explore. So let's talk a little bit about the definitions of each of these things. What are comics? Comics is a medium used to express narratives or other ideas through images that are usually combined with text. It typically takes the form of a sequence of panels and images. Textual devices and creative writing devices such as speech balloons, captions, onomatopoeia can indicate dialogue, narration, sound effects, or other information. So when we think of comics, we think, a lot of us, of maybe this bottom right corner the Marvel and DC comics. We see Batman in his comic strips with the onomatopoeia sound bubbles of pow, boom, that tell us the sounds of what he's doing. And these kinds of texts, they are read usually from left to right if they're American comics, and different things happen in different panels, and the panels connect to each other in a linear way usually. If there's a disjoint in time, there will be some signifier of that. Sometimes there's a break in the panels. It's really a visual kind of experience. So what are graphic novels then? A graphic novel is a book that's made up of comics content. Although the word novel normally refers to long fictional works, the term graphic novel is applied broadly and includes fiction, nonfiction, and anthologized works. It's distinguished from the term comic book, which is generally used for comic periodicals. So when we think about comics, when we think about Marvel or Calvin and Hobbes, these happen in unique, small increments. Marvel comics, DC comics, Batman are published once a month, or something like that, once a week. It's not usually a big volume of work, whereas graphic novels are actually novels. They're they're full-length texts in one place. So that some of them, the first example here, Mouse, up in the top left corner, is serialized. It has two versions. I guess it's not serialized. There's just two segments to the story. So there's Mouse 1 and Mouse 2. But they're both full-length texts. American Born Chinese, In Real Life, Anya's Ghost to Speak, all of those are real or full-length real books in one place. And all of these are great graphic novels to check out if you're interested. So then what is manga? Manga are comics or graphic novels created in Japan or using the Japanese language and conforming to a style developed in Japan in the late 19th century. They have a long and complex prehistory in early Japanese art, and the term manga is used in Japan to refer to both comics and cartooning. So of these three genres, manga is probably the one that I'm the least familiar with. I haven't spent a whole bunch of time investigating manga, but I know that it's very, very popular and that there are lots of TV shows and things based on different manga stories. So I think that this is another great way for us to get kids reading and things like that. An interesting thing about manga is that they are read, we would consider it that they're read from back to front. The story starts in the back of the book as opposed to in the front of the book. So that's something a little interesting. And here's a couple of examples of some manga stories. So like sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, which are often the topics addressed, comics, graphic novels, and manga are regarded by some as unliterary or trashy. Just as we've seen all semester long, there's always the doubters, there's always the people who say that this isn't appropriate or say that this isn't literary, but lots of readers love them. And it's true, we can't deny that these formats are both very entertaining and appealing. And as we have moved further into the 21st century, these texts have become even more literary. There are lots of amazing graphic novels that are considered actual pieces of literature now and are taught in classes beside literary classics. So I think the tide is sort of shifting on this, but just like always, people are afraid of what's unknown and they don't like new things until they get used to it, right? In spite of, or perhaps because of their comic book-like format, these kinds of illustrated literature have entered mainstream publishing for both younger and older audiences. So when we think about kind of going back to our discussion of picture books early in the semester, we learned that there were picture books that were created for kind of a generalized public. These texts, graphic novels, comics, and manga, we may think of comics as things for young kids on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning reading the comics with their dad. But a lot of comics deal with really heavy issues and things that are sometimes not appropriate and sometimes over the head of children. As well, graphic novels are for both younger and older audiences, and I think we too see some manga that has been created for both of those audiences. The stories can be quite complex and meaningful, and the artwork may be just that, art. So I've included this picture. There's a link to it if you want to click through and look at more. I think that one thing we cannot deny about these texts is that the art is an integral part of the text itself. So what are the benefits of these genres? These genres are appealing to reluctant readers. They often have sophisticated storylines. They use complex vocabulary. An interesting tidbit, they use these kinds of texts, especially graphic novels, use more senior high school, college level vocabulary than most newspapers and magazines. The text and image combo requires active participation in the reading, introduction to nonlinear and long-term storytelling, and they support other aims and areas of language arts. So we kind of take language arts and break it down a little bit and look at text in a new and different way. Some of the common themes of graphic novels, comics, and manga address themes of acceptance, nonconformity, prejudice, social justice, coming of age, overcoming of adversity, personal growth, as well as current and historical events, legends, folktales, mythologies, and even classic literature. There is a great rendition of Beowulf in graphic novel form. I've also seen several graphic novel takes on Shakespeare's plays, and I know that there are some graphic novels that are paired in high school classes with the more kind of traditional canonical texts in order to make them more accessible. So it's important for us to pay attention to the fact that works aimed at younger adults are not guaranteed to be age appropriate, so educators should examine items they want to use in their classrooms carefully. We talked a little bit earlier about how sometimes comic books have storylines that may be considered inappropriate for certain age groups. Sometimes there's depictions of violence, sexuality, drug use, things like that, which is more vivid because of the inclusion of the art. In a typical novel, we have these kind of same issues addressed, but without the art, the reader is allowed to create their own mental pictures, which sometimes makes it feel less vivid. So it's really important that we consider carefully how to include these works in our classrooms. So if you're thinking about selecting graphic novels for a classroom, here are some guidelines to consider. Does the graphic novel have visual impact that showcases the artistic ability of the creator? Does the graphic novel blend text and art? Does the use of color add to it, or is it unnecessary? Does the story have the best qualities of the literary genre it represents? Because remember, we can read a graphic novel that's horror or sci-fi or fantasy, and we want to make sure that we're selecting good texts that represent the characteristics of those genres. And finally, are the story and illustrations appropriate for adolescents? So anytime you're choosing a textbook, that's something that you want to have on your mind. Or if you're recommending a text for a student to read, that's something that you want to have in the front of your mind. And it's particularly prescient with graphic novels. Manga actually have a rating system to help determine appropriateness. And I think some of this could be utilized to help you make decisions about the appropriateness of graphic novels and comics as well. So it's kind of similar to our motion picture guidelines rating or video game ratings nowadays. There's E for everyone. The G, like a G in movie rating, E means it's appropriate for readers ages 6 and up. Youth is age 10 and plus, so that means that it may contain mild violence or cursing. It's really kind of up to parents to know the maturity of their child, though. And we've got teens, 13 plus. They may include some sexual innuendo or violent action scenes. Older teens is 16 plus, so we've got more explicit sexual situations, some violent scenes, including blood and gore. Manga is really known for its graphic and violent tales, so, parents are encouraged to review them before giving them to teens. And then finally, rated mature is for 18 plus, strictly for adults. So we've got explicit sexual situations, strong language, and or bloody battles and mayhem. So comics and graphic novels have also been the basis for a lot of TV shows and movies. So if you suddenly find yourself at home with a lot of time to watch TV shows and movies, you might want to check some of these out. We've got a bunch of movies, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Snowpiercer, Hellboy, The Crow, V for Vendetta is a personal favorite. Some TV shows, The Walking Dead came from a graphic novel series, Constantine, Lucifer, Human Target, Preacher, all kinds of different examples of how these books' texts shift from a text-based genre to a different genre. We've also got, similar to manga, anime, which is feature-length anime or Japanese animated movies. Miyazaki is a really amazing anime producer. He has the My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, and Princess Mononoke. Sorry, my tongue is tripping over itself. These are all great films. Highly recommend them if you have access to them and find yourself wanting to view some anime. So I've also included in this slideshow some resources for comics, graphic novels, and manga if you are interested in looking at this from a more educational perspective. This could also potentially help with your writing project, depending upon what you're doing with your writing project. So there are some resources here for you to do some further exploration. So what does all this tell us about these kinds of texts? These kinds of texts involve complex skills that require reading both the text and the art. In many ways, these kinds of texts enhance reader skills in more ways than traditional texts. What I mean by that is that you have to be able to navigate the images and the text, and if you're reading comics or actually any of these, you're looking at the information in a different, non-traditional way. Like, you may not always be reading from left to right. In a graphic novel, you may have one page that is one scene, or you may have different time periods on one page where you, as the reader, have to navigate those complex situations and make the connections for yourself. These texts engage readers in different ways, which, as we know, is appealing to a wider audience of young people and may help us to retain their interest in reading. And these kinds of texts are no less valid than reading a traditional text. We should be aware of that and encourage young folks. I feel like there is a stigma associated with these kinds of texts, that it's not quote-unquote real reading. But I think that it is real reading, and I think anything we can do to get young people reading more is a positive step. So if it starts that they want to read comic books and then maybe progress to graphic novels or manga, I think that that is a really good thing. And I don't think students or kids or young adults or even adults should be discouraged or feel as though these texts are not valid or not literary, because they certainly are. So next week, there will not be a lecture. I will post the exam review sheet on Moodle, as well as an explanation of how the final exam will be conducted. You'll also have access to all of the weekly materials to complete the exam review. So I've actually set up in our week 16 folder, which you can access through Moodle, all of the relevant lecture notes from each of the weeks that will be present on the final exam. So you won't have to go flipping through different folders. You can just go to this one folder and find all of the exam or all of the lecture notes for questions that will be on the exam. And I will post the exam review on Moodle, and I'll record a little video of what you should do to prepare for the exam, as well as what the exam itself will look like. So a reminder, I know that we're not together physically, but I'm still here to help you. Feel free to call me, email me. We can set up any kind of meeting. Remember, you should be working on your Children's Lit project, and you can review the instructions for that on Moodle. If you have any questions about what you should be doing or what you're going to be asked to turn in, please let me know, and don't wait till the last minute to get started with that. If you have questions about anything class related or otherwise, feel free to reach out to me. And as always, stay safe and stay healthy.